Welcome back, everyone, to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Jesse Collings. In rejoining me, returning guest, he is the host of the Through the Years ROH Retrospective Podcast. He is also in charge of our Western Canadian borough. It is Trevor Dame. Trevor, welcome back to the show.
I think I have now done this podcast more than any podcast except my own, through the years. THROH for through for people searching it. And because we spell it because it's about Ring of Honor, get it. But yeah, and I'm just glad about that because I don't want to give Joe Gagne any goddamn accolades at all. So I am glad that I've done this show more than the 5-star match game. Screw that guy. I hope he hears this one day. I'll send it to him.
He's gonna. I'm pretty confident he's gonna hear it anyway. He's gonna invite you back on for you to embarrass yourself on the 5-star.
He keeps threatening, but he doesn't have the guts to do it again.
He's too much of a coward to invite you onto the show on a subject you'll know nothing about. He's gonna lie and say it's gonna be about something else. It's like, oh yeah, it's gonna be about this, and then it's gonna be about something completely obscure that you've never heard of.
To put me on a podcast on any subject is a subject I know nothing about, as I'm sure will become quickly evident on today's episode of your great podcast.
Yeah, so I have you out in Western Canada. We have John Pollock keeping the Ontario-Toronto area on our watch. And then, of course, we have Mr. Warren Hayes, who's French-speaking Canada. So I've got a lot of Canadian coverage. We're still looking for people from the prairies. If someone from the Canadian prairie wants to come on the show, they're more than invited. I want this to be like the most Canadian-American podcast in wrestling.
Yeah, I'm giving you all the hot wrestling scoops from the Nanaimo, Port Alberni, Burnaby, all the hot places, Duncan, Lake Cowichan.
Yeah. Now, a lot of people think you live in Vancouver. You do not live in Vancouver, correct?
No, I live in Kelowna, which is a city of about, I would say 150 to 200,000 people. That's probably about like a 5-6 hour drive away. So
yeah, so you're like in Eastern British Columbia.
yeah, I'm on the mainland. I'm fairly off the coast, but I'm probably about as close to Seattle as I am Vancouver.
Yeah. Where's Abbotsford? Isn't that out there?
Yeah, Abbotsford's closer to Vancouver.
All right. Enough British Columbia, Jar. But yeah, people. So it's like saying you live in Vancouver would be like saying that I live in like Philadelphia.
Yeah, it's weird. Like side tangent, but just like it feels like if you live like in Northeast America, you live like 3 minutes away from 18 major cities. Where in Canada, it's like, yeah, I live kind of near this city. What and kind of near means like, oh, it's an 8-hour drive because just the country's so vast and there's so few major cities. It's not a dense country in that sense.
No, I think it's not the most like least densely populated country in the world, but I think it's up there. I want to say
Yeah.
I want to say Mongolia is the least densely populated country on Earth, but and I think everyone's familiar with the stats. Like Canada, was like 95% of the Canadian population lives within like a couple hours of the U.S. border or something like that.
Yeah. We stay away from the cold and stay close to our very wise, always making great decisions, big brothers.
Yeah, like I'll be honest, if there is somebody out in the Yukon or the Northwest Territories or Nunavut, like if they want to come on the show, I will 100% invite them on the show. I'd be fascinated to talk to somebody that lives up there. So I'm not ignoring, that aspect of Canada, the Maritimes, Prince Edward Island, where all the Collinses are from. I'm happy to talk to those people as well. So I don't mean to cut those people out, but I would love to have contributors from all over Canada. I want this to be a very Canadian representative friendly show.
Absolutely. Put out the call, Yukon, Nunavut. Have the courage of your convictions to appear on this podcast. I'm setting a low bar for you.
Yeah, if I can get somebody from Nunavut on this podcast, if I get someone like in Iqaluit to be on this show, I will interview them, and you can know like nothing about wrestling. I will put it on this show. I'm fascinated by it. Anyway, what we were talking about is I want to talk about this topic that's been kind of going through my head for the last probably for like really it's for the entire existence of AEW, but I want us to go back in a little time machine back to the glorious time period of 2019, Trevor. Remember 2019?
Ah, those were the days.
So 2019, when AEW first starts, we have to remember what the relationship with WWE was like. There was during that time period there was an enormous amount of dissatisfaction among wrestling fans with WWE's product, and it was not dissatisfaction all coming from the hardcore like internet wrestling fans that liked watching indie wrestling in New Japan. There were a lot of really consistent WWE viewers that really were not enjoying the product at all and hadn't enjoyed the product for several years. And there had been so much interest built up in seeing something other than WWE. I think it's a major reason why New Japan Pro Wrestling gained traction in the United States. I think it's a major reason why indie wrestling exploded and the kind of popularity that it ended up having during the late 2010s. It really was because people were sick of WWE and didn't like the product. And AEW comes into this world as kind of like this godsend for anybody that wanted pro wrestling that wasn't WWE. Um, and again, that includes a contingent of fans that were not the typical like fuck the Fed, fuck WWE, fuck Vince, fuck Triple H, like those kind of people. There was a lot of big WWE fans that were turned off by that product, wanted to see something different, and AEW comes along. And that is kind of the universe AEW is created in and steps into. Fast forward to now, the general consensus among wrestling fans, especially the kind of WWE fans that I was talking about, is very different. WWE is a good product. We've seen just in the last few years a lot of fans come back to the product. They're watching it on a weekly basis. They're going to live events. They're talking about it. There is really not a ton of negativity coming from WWE fans over the WWE product. I know there's a lot of negativity in like the circles that I'm in, but those are not coming from WWE fans. The relationship with the relationship the average wrestling fan has with WWE is so different than it was in 2019. And AEW, as the alternative product to WWE, has to essentially adjust in some way to that relationship. Um, what do you think about just in general where we stand in terms of AEW's relationship with a more popular WWE in 2024?
Well, it's interesting in the sense that I feel like part of AEW's success at the start was like they had a great roster even then, even though it's a much deeper roster now. They had some real good top end talent, and they did good things. And there's a lot of great stuff on AEW right from the beginning. But at the same time, I think some of its success were not things it did right as much as the absence of flaws WWE had back in the day. And you're talking about people disliking, WWE back in the day. We could go through the long history of it but in particular, people might forget because it's actually been over half a decade now, but I think it was in 2018 where WWE did a literal in-ring segment on Raw where they had like Triple H and everybody come out and basically apologize to the fans for the product and say they were going to fix it. They did not fix it immediately. They storyline fired Baron Corbin, I believe, but so that's the state of things were. And so like examples I would give would be, for example, like I remember how much it was a big deal just to see a big mainstream, big budget American national promotion, and you're watching it and AEW debuts, and it's just like, oh, the camera isn't cutting away every 3 seconds because Kevin Dunn isn't here. And there were so many things like that, right? Where they were just things that AEW wasn't necessarily reinventing the wheel or doing things in some of these aspects that were great or innovative. It was more just, oh, these flaws are absent. Some of these promos feel like people that just got to go out there and riff and didn't get scripted within an inch of their life, things like that. And some of those flaws with WWE remain, but AEW's case kind of gets weaker as some of those flaws go away. And, I feel what happens is as WWE has kind of, gotten hot and fixed some of those flaws, but not all of them, but also just kind of, you know, risen up again, all of a sudden more of the focus has become less on, when it comes to AEW is less now on, you know, oh, what are you doing that WWE isn't doing wrong? What are you not doing wrong that WWE is? It's more like, well, what are you? And I think so now they're being subject to more analysis, more scrutiny in a way they did not get as much of, back then. And also just, people are going to be easier on a company when there is a thirst for an alternative. And now that WWE is satisfying more of their fan base, there's less of a thirst for an alternative. It is, it's the difference before, like when you're hungry, there's a lot of food that tastes good that when you're full, you might be a little bit fussier. And I think AEW is getting subjected to that too.
Yeah, well, I think like the other thing is that AEW is not a new company anymore. That new car smell is gone. This is a company that has 5 years of a track record we can evaluate on. It is a booker in Tony Khan that we have 5 years of evidence to kind of show what he's going to do and how we kind of feel about him. AEW has consistent strengths. It also has consistent weaknesses that fans have now seen pop up over the course of 5 years. And I think a lot of fans I think a lot of fans and analysts kind of fail to understand that their relationship with AEW has changed over the last 5 years. And I think a lot of people still almost approach it as how are we going to sell this new product to fans that don't know about it? How are we going to try to attract fans that haven't heard of it before? I think that is largely gone because the company has been around for 5 years. And those kind of questions don't really help us understand AEW any better or what AEW would need to do to increase its popularity any better. Because I think we know that AEW has a larger fan base or a larger segment of people that are familiar with the company than are currently tuning into the product each week or currently buying tickets to live events because we've seen those numbers be bigger in the past. So we know that AEW is not connecting with those fans the way it did 3 or 4 years ago. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. We can talk about them all day. We've talked about them many times in the past on this podcast. But I think in general, a lot of the analysis that I see about AEW is still trying to talk about it as if it's a new company as opposed to it's an established entity, which is what it has become since it first started 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think a thing that really like proves that point is that what was one of the big things they did like a while ago, and they still go back to it sometimes now. What's the phrase AEW comes up with? Restore the feeling. Like AEW is now old enough where they have an additional competitor to WWE and all the other promotions, and that's their past self, which is,
Mhm.
if any company that's been around long enough and I've told people in AEW this, like one of your biggest competitors now is your past self because people will be comparing. And, I think it started even when Punk left, where you got this impression now that regardless of how good the company was, it felt smaller in a way without Punk there because it was like here's one major star and now he's gone, so you have one less. And even Jon Moxley's current angle is about him saying that, basically him saying that a lot of the talent's gotten too fat and happy with the status quo and I've got to fix things. They've already done kind of multiple initiatives to basically say to play off AEW nostalgia, for a 5-year-old company to basically say, hey, you remember how things used to be? You think we've lost our way? Well, we're going to get back on track. We're going to go that way. And
It's
yeah,
the Vince. It's the promo from Raw from 2018, right?
yeah,
We've
exactly.
screwed
They
up, and
they they
things are
have
going to be
found
better
themselves.
now.
Yeah, they have found themselves in that situation. And much like WWE, I just wrote about this recently, I think this week on Twitter, which is you can only play that card so many times without fixing it. Tony did that thing with the C2 where said, oh, I was experimenting with pure sports build. We were experimenting with other ideas before that, kind of alluding to the idea of more WWE-esque segments with MJF and Adam Cole's feud and stuff. It's like, well, this experiment with the ratings proved out with that segment, and it some of that vibe stuck around for a few months, but really, it kind of went back to being the all over the map, up and down AEW. Some of the most WWE stuff went away, but some of the most sports based stuff, and whatever you want to feel like, it's just, you can't keep saying we're going to fix things and then revert to old habits, because that's bad news. Because I feel like you can play the thing, we acknowledge that we've lost our way or things aren't great right now, we're going to fix it card once, maybe twice in a period of time. But if you do it any more than that, it gives start and you keep having to do it, it gives off the impression that, one, either that you're incompetent because you don't know what the problem is, or two, you're incompetent because you're incapable of fixing whatever that problem is, and that you're just a scattered company that doesn't have an identity. So that's one thing. As much as I like some aspects of the new kind of Moxley character and stuff, it's things like that where he's giving media interviews about fixing the company, where I start to tug on my collar a bit and be like, you're reaching the limit on resets here, on kind of playing this card with fans to say, like, give us another look.
And to me, like, what does that even mean? When we talk about restore the feeling, we talk about, oh, like fixing the company, getting this company back on the right track. I don't think there's a definitive answer for what that even means. Like,
Well,
when, like, as stupid as the 2018 WWE segment that we talked about was, I feel like I can really WWE's problems were so obvious that I could really easily identify what would be like. Their whole thing was like, we're going to listen to the fans, which was like, okay, maybe they're going to stop, pushing baby faces that the fans openly reject down our throats. Maybe they're going to start pushing, guys who are on the undercard who the fans seem to want to get behind, but Vince McMahon doesn't like them. Maybe we'll push them. Those are kind of like obvious things that I could point to and be like, okay, those are solutions to how things can change. I think if you were to poll like 100 AEW fans about like what does restore the feeling mean, what is saving the company, what does that mean to you as an AEW fan, you would get a ton of different answers. I don't think it means one specific thing that I think you can easily change, and that's why I kind of think it's a stupid message.
Well, I think it's tough also because I don't think AEW has a particularly strong identity. And I don't know if it ever has, but I think particularly now, and I think I would say one of, maybe this is kind of jumping the gun on topics, but I think one of the big problems AEW has is, people have referenced that Tony Khan at one of the last few post pay-per-view presser said that thing. I forget the exact number, but something like, I have like 27 creative voices I listen to, or 34, something crazy. And people have taken that literally, and then people get mad. Look, I have no idea if that number is literal or not, but the point is the same whether it's literal or not, which is that Tony Khan listens to a lot of voices, and I think the product reflects that, where you can see segments that very much feel like out of WWE tropey, and then you can see something that would be, completely different. Like WWE wouldn't just put on, like, I don't know, Hologram versus the Beast Mortos just to have a banger lucha match with no context and no build. And that's a cool thing in some respects that I'm a big fan of. But then you might see in a segment later like a really goofy backstage skit with like Mercedes Monet doing something, or a classic skit where someone's having a match and you have someone looking at a weird angle at a TV screen just to let where it comes right out of the WWE playbook. And it's a company that I feel like doesn't really, every segment feels disconnected. Like, it doesn't feel like there's being a filter that's really pushing everything into one direction. It feels like someone in the creative or some wrestler wants to do this idea that's more in this realm of wrestling, so they're doing that. And then the next segment, Jon Moxley wants to do back to the basics, so his segments will be like that. But then, Mercedes Monet wants to do something that's more in her comfort zone and plays to her skills, so something like that. And people will say, "Oh, that's good, that's variety." And I do like wrestling companies to have variety, but I think there's a difference between variety and having something that's just so tonally inconsistent that it really pleases nobody completely.
Yeah, which is kind of why I think this Jon Moxley storyline is kind of dumb in some way because, like, he's the world champion. He can get his message across, right? This idea that we're going to be super serious competitors, and anyone that's not going to be super serious and focused on winning and dominating, we're going to stomp them. But at the same time, he's not going to be the only creative force in the product. Like you said, like you could watch a super serious Jon Moxley segment and then see a more comedy segment or something like that after that, because unless Jon Moxley is like going to become the booker and be in control of every single segment, um, then like the idea of the oh, I'm going to single handedly kind of like change AEW is something that doesn't really make any sense because it's never going to be really reflected in the product unless you go like whole hog in terms of creatively changing everything.
Yeah.
I think with AEW really it comes down to, like, I think that the wrestlers have a lot of creative freedom, especially the bigger stars, to do things that they want to do. And when you have a room of a lot of different people, they're going to have a lot of different ideas for what they want to do. And I don't know if that's a bad thing. I think that it's ultimately on Tony to draw maybe firmer boundaries about what we're comfortable doing on television so that we're not maybe drifting into like a bad WWE segment. I think he needs to recognize that more. But ultimately, I think it's a positive that the wrestlers have this creative freedom, even if I think that needs to be policed a little bit closer.
Yeah, I think AEW's biggest strengths and weaknesses are the same thing,
Hmm.
and they're the opposite of the biggest strengths and weaknesses of the Vince McMahon latter day era of WWE, and to a degree, to some respect, even the current WWE, which is, Vince McMahon, his big thing was everything had to fit his vision. Like maybe
It
there'd be
was
some other
micromanaged.
yeah, everything in the undercard, maybe some stuff that he didn't care about, pay attention to, could sneak through. But like in the big picture, everything had to fit his vision. And there was really bad parts about that. Like from the 80s to 90s on, there'd be a lot of times where they would sign a wrestler that was great and they would needlessly tinker to them and kind of make them worse because Vince had to have, it had to be his vision. There was this feeling that if you don't do it our way, it's not good. If we don't put our spin on it, we can't take complete ownership of it. And there's been a lot of times throughout his wrestling history where WWE has kind of taken really interesting talents and just filed off all the edges to make them conform to this WWE template. And that's the negative of that. But the strength of that is there is a distinct vision to that company. There's a distinct identity to that company, and there has been for a long time. And there's a confidence to it, and what you're watching. They know what they have a cockiness to it. Like they know, they have a very specific feeling of what wrestling should be, what it should look like, how it should work, how it shouldn't work. And if something doesn't fit into that, they push it into that mold until it fits how they feel. So that's the strengths and weaknesses to the WWE. The strengths and weaknesses to AEW would be the opposite, which is there is this feeling in AEW that like I think it's a like a false thing where sometimes people act like Tony Khan is this pushover and doesn't say no to any idea. I
Yeah,
know
well,
for a fact that
there's a lot of preconceived notions about AEW and the people who are in charge of AEW, and that gets foisted upon any criticism as well.
like I know for a fact there's things Tony Khan says no to you no to. I've heard things that Tony Khan has said no to. So like that's not true, but there is this feeling that you know, wrestlers get more creative control. They get more influence on their book, and I know that too. Like I know there are wrestlers that have gotten to really book ideas out for themselves. The promos a lot to some wrestlers that feels like they get to really speak from the heart more and off the cuff, and there. In some ways, it is good that you can have completely different segments. There's a sweet spot to that but the negative is that it's a company that feels tonally inconsistent and that can veer wildly and doesn't really please anyone completely because there's too many things that don't appeal to one kind of fan and too many things that then bug the kind of fan that would appeal to and so forth. And I guess what I would sum up with is like people go crazy about the idea that Tony Khan listens to 2 or 3 dozen voices. That's not crazy if you're running a big company or even a big wrestling company. And as a booker and the head man in charge, one of your big jobs is to be a filter. You can't come up with every idea yourself. You need other ideas, so you listen to talent, you listen to a team of creative people. The point is, you have to be the filter, which means you have to know I hear 20 ideas and I say yes to I'm able to identify the 4 really good ones. I say yes to those, and I'm able to identify the 16 really bad ones. And I have the guts and bravery and the knowledge to say, those are the 16 bad ones. We're not going to do those and keep those people happy. And it wouldn't matter if Tony Khan could have 100 voices in the room, if he just, the job is not to limit voices. The job is to, I guess, one, have a process that makes that not just a drain on your life, but also to have to have a bit of that Vince McMahon in you, as horrible as that is to say, that sense of I have a vision and everything here has to kind of fit within that vision. And that vision can be a big tent, but he has to sit down and go, these are things that we're always going to have every week, and these are things we're never going to have. And then there's this broad middle ground we can play on. And I just feel like the vision right now, the filter feels a kind of loose.
Yeah, the other thing I'll say about the Moxley storyline and just in general, all these guys coming out in various different promos and segments over the last year or so, talking about we're going to restore the feeling, we're going to save AEW, I'm the face of AEW, you're not the face of AEW, blah blah blah. I don't think those are compelling storylines at all. Like, I don't think the average fan like cares about like who is going to be the face of AEW, or like there's a fan sitting there and be like, yes, I want AEW to be saved by Daniel Garcia and Darby Allin, because like I think it's way too meta to really connect with a wide audience, because I don't really know who really cares about that. I think the hardcore fans see through it, and the more casual fans are like, I don't really care about who's the face of a company. Like these are now meta angles as opposed to personal conflicts that I think would be what would end up being a more traditional pro wrestling feud. Like Hangman Page versus Swerve, like that's a personal conflict that people got behind. It wasn't focused on some sort of meta narrative angle about who the face of AEW was. I always hated the build to the whenever they did the 4 pillars 4-way when MJF was the champion. I think it was for Revolution maybe last year. And it was like, oh, I'm the face of AEW. No, I'm going to be the face of AEW. I'm like, who gives a fuck who the face of AEW is? It's like a dumb phrase. Like maybe if I was like arguing about it on Twitter with some 12-year-olds, I would care. But that's not, to me as a wrestling fan, not a compelling angle or storyline. And I kind of think everything that's derivative of that falls in the same category. Like, man, like Jon Moxley's going to come save AEW by like beating people up. I'm like, yeah, I mean, I guess it's cool him being a dominant champion. I can get behind that, but like, I can kind of take or leave like this whole idea that we're fighting for the soul of AEW. Like, that's stupid. Like, that's
Well,
stupid. Why can't it just be like a personal, traditional pro wrestling conflict? Why does it have to be this meta narrative about what has happened to AEW? And AEW is some sort of like precious, like almost like literal entity that needs to be protected and preserved.
Well, in addition to that, it presents a problem in the opposite direction too, because when you just see a regular wrestling angle involving Moxley now, it now feels like that's it. Because, like for example, they promoted for a couple days at a time. Jon Moxley's going to take over TBS this week on Dynamite, and I watched Dynamite tonight, and Jon Moxley came out at the top of the hour. They attacked a random guy, JD Drake, and then he cut the same promo he would have cut to build up a match with Orange Cassidy for the pay-per-view that he would have cut 6 months ago, 12 months ago. It was a perfectly good promo. And that's it. And then they attack, they get into a brawl, and that's it. And that's their one isolated segment for the show. And it sets a standard of like, Well, he didn't take over anything. He didn't you when you have this guy keep saying he's going to change things and he has all the power now because he's the world champion, and then he comes out for his one isolated segment, and that segment is very much like everything else. It is a very traditional segment. It isn't really playing to a meta narrative. You get this weird thing where it's like, well, you've kind of created this framing that he's going to change everything, and really he's just a guy that has one or two segments on the big show, and he says that a lot, and he's just in random is typical feuds. So it's kind of like in some ways pleasing no one. So the person like you, that's like just this meta narrative acting like you're going to fight for the soul of the company is annoying. And for the other person that's like getting excited about that idea, they might watch a segment like tonight and eventually, after a few more weeks of that, go, well, what's he doing to change the company? He's not, doesn't really feel like he's fighting for the soul of the company. Like when Orange Cassidy tonight asks, like, I'm gonna bring back the company, when I take the title back from you and all this stuff. It's like the company isn't really different.
Yeah,
Like
again, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Like it's yeah, like it's a company. It's like it's not like we're living in some sort of like feudal state now in AEW because Jon Moxley is the champion.
I mean, as annoying as some aspects of it were, like, and people have said this, if you really want to go whole hog with this, you kind of have to treat it like the early days of the NWO, where they are a presence throughout the show and kind of interfering in multiple feuds and multiple different tiers of the roster. And where is the where to some people it might become overbearing, and it might
Yeah,
leave
they
less
need to have
air.
like
And
a Moxley acolyte on commentary all the time.
I mean, there are a lot of ways this could go wrong, and it's a tricky thing. But if you really want to make it feel different, you have to make it so it's not just. If you really want to make it feel like a takeover, it can't be a couple isolated segments that are all neat and tidy and kind of quarantined from the rest of the show, which is what everything on the show feels like.
Yeah, and I like the idea behind the angle in terms of like we're gonna shoot a big angle that we're gonna kind of build the world title around, and we're gonna build. It's gonna involve a lot of our top wrestlers. It's gonna help us try to elevate some new names forward. I like that idea of all that, and I think Moxley's a fine guy to kind of build that around as a heel. I think it's a great uh, coat of paint for him. Um, so I like the idea of all that, but like you said, I agree in that you kind of do have to go whole hog in multiple segments. Um, and at the same time, like I don't know if the AEW fans are really like that. Like this is a point I made last year, and I wrote an article about it on voiceofwrestling.com. But I think like when Cody went to WWE, when he went back to WWE, they like definitely got their money's worth out of Cody. They had him in multiple segments on every show. They had the Cody countdown clock where they were telling you when he's going to appear. He was all over the show, and WWE does a really good job in terms of we have a few of our absolute top stars, and everybody is going to know that they're our top stars because we're going to expose the shit out of them multiple times on every one of our television shows. And AEW has never been like that. AEW has been much more of like, okay, here's your, for their top stars, here's your, 15 minutes of television on Dynamite each week, and that's what you're going to get. That's how you're a top star, as opposed to doing the multiple segments per show. And I've thought like, I think in AEW fans prefer like the AEW fans, especially like if you're talking about AEW as an alternative that's going to do things differently than WWE, is that AEW likes the more kind of like assembly. Why can't I remember the word? The ensemble cast for the show, as opposed to having a few leading men and leading women. I think that AEW fans, and part of the enthusiasm for an alternative was because we were coming off of years of WWE where John Cena was pushed above everyone else, and always, Cena won all his matches, and then we had the Roman Reigns era. Roman Reigns won all of his matches, and was really overexposed as like the top star in the company. And I think AEW fans don't necessarily want to see that kind of level of focus on one individual. It's good for WWE and what their fans kind of want. And when you have a guy like Cody that the fans really like, it's definitely easier to pull it off than it was when you had Roman as a babyface the first time. Uh, but I think that just in general, I don't know if you could like I don't know if AEW fans would like seeing Jon Moxley on the show, 6 segments per. per Dynamite. I don't think that's what you would want. But as you said, because you're doing this angle, it's kind of what you would need to have to really emphasize it as something really special and unique in terms of an angle on the show.
Well, it's about finding that middle ground. And I feel like so many of the problems of AEW are tough to talk about. Well, not tough to talk about, but maybe tough to tweet about because it's hard to do a lot of
Well, your
context
problem
and
is tweeting in general, Trevor. I know I'm
yeah,
not the first to come to you with that.
how dare you? That's my life. No,
You know you're like the last worthwhile person on that app. You know that, right?
I'm not going to take accept that. But
The
thank you anyway.
day
But
you go to Blue Sky,
actually, today I am now cross posting on Blue Sky. I
yeah.
installed a piece of like JavaScript or some
Mhm.
I don't know, some web thing that apparently it will cross post my tweets. But anyway,
Yeah.
uh,
Okay. Yeah.
um,
That's big for the wrestling Twitter sphere. There are people on there just for your tweets. And I said, now I can go on Blue Sky.
but thing I was going to say is so many of the problems with AEW are things where it's like again WWE is on the opposite extreme. So it's not like it's like I don't want you to be like WWE. I want you to reach a middle ground, and it's tough. It's tough because it's easy to say either be hot or cold. It's hard to say, well, be a comfortable temperature because that people have different opinions on what that is. Have a family argue over the thermostat, stuff like that. Like everyone's got a different opinion. It's within a range, but and it's things like that where I think it's something that WWE does really well but overly does at times is yeah, like you were saying, they will pick their dating back to years and years. Vince McMahon, you will always watch WWE and you can tell after watching one show on any brand who they think the stars are because they get slotted better, they get talked about more even in segments they're not in. They get featured in specific ways, they get more time on the mic, they get more everything, they get more resources. And there have been times in WWE history where it's been annoying, or even in other wrestling history, like the example people would give when I was a kid growing up was like during WCW in the late 90s, as hot as the NWO was, there would be matches on the undercard, great matches you'd want to see, where the announcers would spend 80% of it talking about the NWO angle in the middle that's
Nice.
kind of happened in the main event. And you're
If
like, could you talk about
anyone
this match a little bit?
anyone that has ever like wanted to watch like some Lance Storm WCW matches, like you'll realize very quickly that most of Lance Storm's WCW matches are Bobby Heenan and Dusty Rhodes talking about the NWO.
Yeah. And so again, it's about finding that middle ground where I feel like, yeah, I feel like when you watch AEW, it's a very generous promotion, but generous to the point of damaging itself. Where yeah, everyone gets their segment. Like when I watch AEW, so often it feels like it's a show that's designed not to try and build certain people as stars, but it's like how can we get as many people something on this show as possible? How can we spread the wealth as much as possible? We got a big roster. Let's try and give a lot of people a little bit of something. But when you get a little bit of, I think the history of wrestling shows that success comes not from serving everyone on your roster a little bit. It comes from identifying your top few people and getting every drop of juice you can out of them. And TV time, all promo time, match time, they're all resources. And when you give everyone the exact same amount, they all feel similar in terms of star power. One of the ways you tell fans this guy is more important or this woman is more important than the other people on this roster is a bigger star is you talk about them more. You give them more ring time, more interview time. You feature them more often. They're on every week. They don't disappear for a month after they lose a feud. All these things and AEW often does not do many of them. And the Moxley thing we've been talking about is a great example of you're trying to sell this angle that is this huge new thing that's changing everything, but you're trying to spread the wealth. So he gets mentioned a couple times a show. He gets his one or two segments, and everything else is as if he doesn't exist. And if that was in WWE, even though I feel like they go too far the opposite direction, he'd be bookending the show oftentimes. They'd be talking about him on multiple segments that had nothing to do with him, all this stuff. And it would be annoying to the fan who's like, I get it already. Like, the people on your great podcast network, they come up with they have that phrase, the subtlety hammer. And it's a great phrase, but I feel like sometimes you do kind of need to hammer things a little bit. And an eagle-eyed fan like you or me that's watching everything, that's then thinking about and talking about online after the fact, we don't need the segments to constantly hammer things home. But to the average fan, you kind of do. That's not living or dying on every bit of this.
I think a major thing when we talk about the change in specifically WWE and the way fans feel about it is obviously Vince McMahon goes away. He goes away the first time, but he kind of doesn't go away because he's still kind of behind the scenes pulling the strings, even if Paul Levesque is kind of the public face. Now it seems like since the start of this year, he really is permanently gone from the company. And I think that really is a major shifting point for WWE, obviously, but also for AEW, because the number one thing that AEW had going for it, really, in comparison to WWE, was that the hardcore or the existing fan base for WWE, many of them had just completely lost faith in the creative leadership of the company. Even if they still like WWE, they still really like the wrestlers, they still would, love watching the shows and going to live events. There was an incredible apathy towards a large aspect of the product because those fans knew that Vince McMahon was going to bundle it somehow, that he was going to screw up a push, that he was going to make a bad decision, that he was going to change his mind. There had just the faith had completely eroded in WWE's creative leadership, as opposed to in AEW, even if fans didn't necessarily have earned faith in and trust in Tony Khan, the fact that it wasn't Vince McMahon making all these decisions was enough to get them a lot of, I think, support in the early going. That just because anyone other than Vince McMahon running a professional wrestling company with the kind of budget that AEW has would be seen as a huge positive, even if we don't necessarily know or trust this guy yet. Flash forward to today, I think the WWE fan base has a total faith and confidence in Paul Levesque. Um, I think your typical WWE fan feels really good about the creative leadership of the company. On the flip side, we now have a track record with Tony Khan. We have some fans that have been turned off by his booking for whatever reason they feel that, and there are several key reasons why some fans might feel that way. And that I think is a really big distinction. Is it went from an advantage AEW had when it first started to it's now almost a weakness, especially with Vince McMahon gone in WWE. Um, in the idea that Paul Levesque is going to give the fans what they want and has earned so much more good faith in the company, and I think that's a huge change from where they started. I mean, if you go back and watch any WWE show, go watch like the Royal Rumble from like pick a year in the 2010s. Like no one on that roster is over except like one or two guys. Just all of these guys come out and they get almost no reaction. Fans have no confidence in them. It was so difficult for someone to get organically over with the audience because fans had been told that if they get behind somebody, WWE is not going to listen. And you compare that to the product now, it's very, very different. We've seen guys who the fans have rallied behind WWE, even if they don't push them all the way and like make them world champion, they listen and they give them a chance. They got behind LA Knight and they gave him a world title program with Roman Reigns. They got behind Sami Zayn and they, gave him a big feud with Roman Reigns and the bloodline and things like that. If they get behind somebody, Paul Levesque has shown that he will listen to them, certainly to a greater degree than Vince McMahon would. And that has really, I think, been a huge game changer for the way the average wrestling fan feels about both products. I think that it went from being totally distrustful to WWE to now feeling a lot of confidence in WWE. And on the flip side, a lot of those people feeling much more skeptical about Tony Khan's creative leadership. So I think that balance in the relationship between how fans feel about the creative leadership of their respective companies has completely changed and really had a really big impact on both companies.
Well, it's another example of WWE removing a flaw, right? Because there's a lot of things in WWE creatively these days and stylistically that they do that I am not into, that I don't like.
Mhm.
But what they don't have is they removed that Vince McMahon feel of things changing direction every 2 seconds. The classic Vince tore up Raw an hour before the show and insist on all these changes, and the show really feels like that, and directions change out of the blue. And yeah, that feeling that certain people have a glass ceiling and certain people are getting pushed regardless of what fans feel like that's all lessened, yeah, they seem to at least tip their head in the direction of fans when they get behind someone. If a guy like Sami Zayn maybe doesn't get as far as maybe someone like me thinks that the fan response warranted, they now give them enough to placate the fans and make them feel like they did get used properly. Um, and yeah, and in that sense, it's not so much that AEW has done something wrong. It goes back to what I said earlier, which is one of the things that AEW has a real strength at the start was just they had the absence of all these flaws that WWE had. And one of those flaws, that's one of the biggest flaws WWE has now largely removed, where for all the things I don't like about modern WWE, typically programs play out at a logical pace and a logical sense. And I don't feel like things are being constantly changed at the last minute. And it kind of goes again to these two extremes where the Vince WWE was this feeling of I like what I like and I don't give a fuck if anyone else doesn't like it. And when he had the monopoly, he could largely do that because even if he was bleeding fans, he wasn't bleeding off enough fans quick enough that he could not still make millions of dollars holding a monopoly. Where Tony Khan, I feel in some ways, is the opposite, where I think much of his booking is a reflection of a guy who very much listens to everybody and tries to make everybody happy, which is impossible. And another reason why I think the product feels oftentimes like it's being pulled in a million directions. That guy, AEW is one of the most responsive companies. Like even every time you see something that gets like social media buzz like for a week or two, AEW will listen to it. And like there was a thing a weeks ago where AEW doesn't promote their shows, the upcoming dates enough, and they're not announcing matches quick enough, and the pay-per-view bill on the last pay-per-view, they weren't, all these things. Well, now this month they've clearly listened to respond to that. They're now announcing, like, they're showing, promoting on, don't forget, these are the shows, this is where we're running shows the next 3 weeks, and hey, we're announcing matches for next week's Dynamite again on this week. And they're small things, but they are, the Vince McMahon era of WWE in the latter years was often a matter of, fans literally like screaming on the show, we want this guy pushed, we don't like this, and him saying, fuck you, I don't care. So you couldn't have two more opposite extremes. And again, it's about finding that middle ground of having a vision, going, I'm going to listen to criticism, but there's going to be some criticism I ignore because it doesn't go with my vision. But I'm not going to go to the Vince McMahon extreme of I have a vision that's so tight that I will not hear criticism from the fans that are paying, from anybody anywhere. It's about finding that middle ground. And the last thing I'll do on this point is you talk about how like people say Triple H can, are really in love with him, and they are. And I think part of that's just the way the company is booked now. But I think part of it also is Triple H really sells himself. Like he has sold himself to the fans as like the good dad, the creative guy. Like this is the guy that's like humbly like, oh, I don't want to
It's
take credit. I want to be.
absurd.
And now he
It's
comes
abs-
out for every major show at the start. He takes credit for everything. Where Tony Khan, meanwhile, I don't think he's great at selling himself, where he has this awkward, it's kind of adorable, but kind of awkward energy at times. And like the CM Punk thing, he had the balls to come out in front of Chicago's fans and tell the fans live because he felt like that he needed to, that like I know you love him. I liked him too. But I had to do this and let the fans boo him. I don't think Triple H ever would have done that. He would have hid from them. He would have sent some, if he had to send, he would have just done the press release. And if you were going to have someone come out there, he would have sent someone else. He would have not taken that bullet because he is going to manage his image, right? He is not going to be the bearer of bad news there. And it's just one of many examples where WWE is savvy about playing certain games, and managing your image is part of the business.
right. Levesque spent time, in NXT cultivating a fan base that trusted him, almost as like a response to the way the fans didn't trust Vince. Right? Is it Levesque created this indie company within WWE that was aimed at, again, like the same audience that AEW was aiming at, fans that were burned out by the main roster product. Um,
He was
and
able to create this narrative that everything was like NXT, it would be in this utopia. And then when Vince was gone, whether it's now completely that's completely valid, that narrative had already been seated in fans' minds for
Mhm.
years. So they just, I think, kind of assumed it.
Yeah, there
You
was good
know,
faith. There was good faith already there, even though the main roster, the way he books WWE main roster is nothing like the way he did NXT. Like, remember people thought
yeah.
Johnny Gargano was going to get a big push because God, he loved him in NXT, and then he hasn't done anything of note since coming to WWE and being on the main roster. Um, he likes pushing big guys.
But yeah, that's the difference between a company, that, set like the indoor attendance record for a pro wrestling show and didn't do nearly enough to really flaunt it versus the company that like make sure you know every good metric they have and every good thing they've ever done and make sure their power players are always there to grab their roses in public. Like again, all those things individually, all these little moments we could isolate, they don't mean much individually, but when you talk about the perception war, they do add up over time when you have so many of them.
When I first went to an AEW show, I know you live in the middle of nowhere, so I don't know what your experience is going to AEW shows live.
Never been.
But yeah,
I'm a real wrestling fan. I don't attend shows. I watch it at home on a laptop like a real
yeah,
wrestling fan.
yeah. Well, like as you said, you get like I think there has AEW. I think that AEW is going to Vancouver, or have they been to Vancouver once?
They were to Vancouver. I did
Right,
not attend. I didn't
but
want to get attacked by all my enemies.
that was probably the closest they've ever been to you, and that's still like
Yeah,
as
like
you mentioned,
like a
like
five,
a
6 hour drive
yeah,
probably.
yeah. So it's not a your not it's not really a no criticism on your behalf, but when I first went to an AEW show, and subsequently as I've continued to go on to shows that they've had near me. What jumped out to me the first time I went was, man, like everyone is over. Like it's not just the top star comes out, gets a big reaction. Everyone, guys come out and the fans are into them. They're into pretty much every act on the show. Some guys get bigger reactions than others, but even your mid carder kind of talent comes out and they get a good reaction. And it was really big dramatic difference from WWE where so few of these talents were over. Um, and now I think WWE has found a much better solid ground in terms of getting the talent over. And to the degree, I also think WWE has really created um, a fun live atmosphere for going to the shows that I think has probably been underrated in a lot of ways. And it's something that, again, I think AEW had an advantage on that AEW doesn't have anymore. I don't think it's really necessarily has anything to do with AEW as much as it has to do with WWE really getting their act together, and getting these entrances over and getting the music over and getting the catchphrases over all to a greater degree than they were hitting before. So now if you watch, you know, Jay Uso come out on an episode of Raw, you're like, man, this looks really fun. I want to go to this show. Or if you go to a show and you're not like a huge fan, you see everyone reacting, you're like, oh, wow, this guy comes across like a big star. I think that is something that WWE has done a really good job. And I think just in general, um, Trevor, you and I don't want to say that we're both old men, but this is something that I just personally do not understand, but I get it. It is a lot of people my age that are participating in this kind of behavior. Like I do feel like a lot of WWE's product and like the way the live event is presented is for people to record themselves at the events, saying catchphrases, singing along to songs, cheering for stuff. It's very social media friendly for the people attending live, and it feels like a large portion of the product is geared that way, and it gives off the impression I think of the product is exciting and lively and cool, especially with a younger generation than I think they have ever before. And it's something that AEW hasn't really been able to match. And I'm okay with AEW not matching it because I think a lot of the WWE stuff is like really ridiculous and dumb, but I think it is resonating with a younger generation, and there's something that AEW kind of has ceded ground to them on.
Well, it feels like it did in the Attitude Era in that sense. It feels like when the way it is when companies get really hot, where you start having a larger amount of fans and a lot more casual fans, which is
Mhm.
you start having fans that attend not because they want to see the next chapter of the story they've been keeping track of. It's because they see these people as stars and they want to see them live. They want to see them make their entrance. They want to hear the catchphrase. You
Yeah,
know,
but specifically a younger, like hipper audience. then we talked about how WWE's average viewer age was so old, and so much of the WWE product was built around Attitude Era nostalgia and all this kind of stuff like that. I feel like it's really shifted into gaining a much younger foothold with people.
And you want to talk about a big difference between WWE and AEW. One thing about that feeling of, oh, we want to come just because we want to see these specific big stars and we want to see them just be there and witness their entrance live, all these little things that make up their persona. Um, if you go to a WWE show, you generally know exactly that you're going to get to see that. In AEW, you don't, like apart from a guy like Roman Reigns, who's like a rarefied air super guy that has a limited dates contract. If you like Cody Rhodes and he's on the
Mhm.
brand you bought a ticket for, you can buy that ticket pretty confident he's going to do something on that show.
Yeah.
Where in AEW, there's, people have talked about this for months and months now. There are so many times they'll put an ad out for tickets on sale for this date for a TV taping, and then when you get to the day of the TV taping, almost none of those faces that were on the picture that was sold to you are working the show, are even in the building, are working the show. And you there is no AEW show other than maybe the pay-per-views you can buy and be confident I'm going to if your favorite star is whoever, there is no show other than the pay-per-views that you can buy and go, I can be pretty confident I am going to see my favorite wrestler blank work this show. And maybe that's one of the reasons why pay-per-view has held up better for them attendance wise, although it's seen a little bit of declines too, is because it is still the place where I want to see MJF, I mean, other than these movies, but like, Will Ospreay or whatever, he might disappear off a TV for 3 weeks, but he's not going to disappear off the pay-per-view.
Mhm.
And one of the other thing you said that I think was interesting was talking about how everyone was over in AEW, and it kind of reminds me of the way WWE was before it caught fire again, which what I would say about WWE back then was they were really good about making upper mid carders and they were horrible about making main eventers. They were having a lot of guys, they were good at getting a lot of guys to like a 7 out of 10 overness. And I feel like that's where AEW kind of is now, where part partly because they have such talent and partly because they do this spread the wealth, everyone gets a segment, everyone cycles in and out where they get a few weeks off and then they come back for a feud and all this stuff. You have a whole roster full of upper mid cards of people that the fans know and have some familiarity with and that they like, but not a ton of guys that feel special on that super tippy top stardom. And some people might not think that's a problem, but I think for business wise, if you look at the history of wrestling success for on a big level has always been about finding that one, two, or three guys that are a 9 or 10 out of 10 in the stardom power, and milking those people for all they're worth, not having a roster of 7 out of 10s. It's never been about the depth. It's been about finding one or two just blazing hot stars and creating those people. It's been about, Hogan, Austin. It's not been about the bench. And, WWE is back to that. They have a good bench, but who drives the business? It's Cody. It's, Roman. And then even when he's not around, the bloodline is kind of giving him a presence even when he's not there because everything about that's about him. It's guys like that. And then when you have a couple big stars, it's easy for that bench to kind of step up around them. But and again, in AEW, it's just who's going to be on this week? You don't know. Who's going to be there live when I buy a ticket? You don't know.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, since the inclusion of Collision, it's really changed it because I think if AEW talent is healthy, they're probably going to be on one of those two shows, but you kind of don't know which one of those shows they're going to be on. As dumb as like the talent split between Collision and Dynamite was to make sure that none of CM Punk's enemies or people related friends with CM Punk's enemies are going to be on Collision, it did help at least signify a difference and distinction between which wrestlers are going to be on which show. Um, in WWE, obviously, with this roster split, has that as well, right? You know who's going to be on Raw when you buy a ticket to Raw. You know who's going to be on SmackDown when you buy a ticket to SmackDown. Um, I want to float something to you. Um, I was talking about this with Joe Lanza the other day, and at least in the circles I'm in, I've heard kind of nonstop criticism about the MJF World Title reign, in the Adam Cole storyline, and the Brochachos, and how comedic that was, and how WWE centric it seemed to be in terms of its content. Uh, and that just was like a line in the sand for a lot of fans. They just that was when they lost their confidence in AEW, and it's never come back. It's when they had a certain segment of fans that really didn't want to see anything that was WWE like in their product, and they saw that whole main event storyline angle develop, and they said, "This is not for me. I'm done with AEW." And the argument was basically like, subsequently when AEW has tried to come back to it, like this Jon Moxley angle, which is largely based almost like a response to the WWEification of the company, and in the whole restore the feeling and all that kind of stuff like that. That stuff's not resonating and drawing the way it would have, because the fans that it would connect with the most are no longer watching the product or no longer have faith in the product. What do you think about that theory? Because I don't know if I understand agree with it, but I find it really interesting, the idea that AEW, because they've made some creative choices to be kind of more mimicky to some stuff in WWE, they have burned some fans away from the product, and they'll will not be able to get those fans back because they've burned their trust.
It's hard for me to offer an opinion on that because it's hard for me to, get in the minds of, the vast public. But I feel one problem, again, it would go back to the whole show is if you didn't like Dynamite 3 months ago, the show isn't that much different. I mean, I feel like this month they've gotten better at building things and announcing there, so it has changed in that sense. But if you
Mhm.
just don't like some of the stylistic parts of it, rather than just the how much in advance they build things and how they kind of build certain story beats, if you just didn't like, oh, I didn't like certain backstage segments or weird things or whatever, like none of that's changed. You're getting one or two Moxley segments and the rest of the show has changed. And the selling of Moxley's thing is also weird in one other respect, which is he's a heel. He is supposed to be, he nearly killed Bryan Danielson. He is feuding with faces. He is nefariously attacking people from behind, all this stuff. And yet the things he is saying to that audience are babyface things. So you get this weird mix where like he's supposed to be like he is supposed to you can it's hard to do the restore the feeling thing as a heel when you have clearly lost audience and some people agree with him. Like,
Yeah,
so those fans are going to want to like him. It's hard. It's not a consistent character. Like, he's the nefarious evil heel who is doing now media interviews with the New York Post talking about like how I'm trying to help the people backstage and I'm questioning creative and I'm trying to help the next young generation. And I just thought, wow, that's so nefarious. Like, how dare you, sir?
yeah, I agree. I think it's kind of this awkward ground. And I've heard I'm kind of ultimately neutral on this angle. I don't really have a strong take on it, but I've heard like in the Voice of Wrestling Discord, in like that space, I feel like I've seen a lot of praise for, oh, this is great. This is some of the best stuff. This is what we've been waiting for, all that kind of stuff. Outside of that circle, I wouldn't even say more casual fans, because these are people that watch the show every week. They have the complete opposite. They're like, this is trash. It feels ice cold. I don't care about this. I don't understand Moxley's group. I don't think it's resonating with people outside of a very small hardcore circle of like AEW fans that are kind of maybe aware and into this maybe meta narrative that Moxley's going to try to reset the company, and that's what they want to see it reset as. I think a lot of fans are like, I guess it's like it's basically the BCC who we've seen for years and years, and Moxley's been exposed a lot on television. He's been a main figure in AEW. He doesn't really necessarily feel new and exciting, and I just don't think it's really resonating with the AEW fans as a whole. It may be resonating with a small segment of hardcore fans that feel a very particular way about the product. But I don't see it really like getting massively over. It doesn't seem to have any impact on business. And again, the counter argument for that would be like, it's going to take time to kind of restore a lot of fans' faith in the company. It's not going to be something that's done overnight. But I don't know. I don't feel like this angle feels hot the way that they really want it to be.
No, but going to what you just said, when you're cold, it's hard. It gets harder and harder to get hot
Mhm.
again, and when you're hot, it gets harder and harder to get cold again for a while because you know you just that momentum in both directions carries you. So in one sense, things take time. But what I will say about the Moxley angle is, if I just write it as a one sentence summary, it sounds great, which is Jon Moxley, one of the original stars of AEW, feels the company has strayed his way, and he and a team of mercenaries are going to raise holy hell to change the company to fit his vision. Great. That you can do a lot with that. Moxie's an incredibly talented promo guy, one of the best in the business. He's a star the fans really care about. Great stuff. Okay, how, when you tune every week, what's his goal? How does that manifest? Like, he should be fighting towards a goal, and the people on the other side should be fighting to prevent that goal from happening. He's the world champion. Every week, all that happens is he calls out one or two wrestlers and says some vague things about how things are going to change. If you're watching every week, what's what's the through line? Like if again, let's compare it to WWE right now. They build to things, moments where right now they are building to this idea of getting the band back together, where the bloodline is all going to get back together, and Sam and all these guys that didn't like each other, they're all going to get back. They are building to a specific moment.
Mhm.
What is the moment this Moxley angle is building to? It's not building to any moment. It's not building to any end goal. It is simply like window dressing on segments that feel very similar. Like, you know,
Yeah, I think they would say that the it's building towards somebody beating Jon Moxley for the world title.
but again, like what's Moxley's goal? Like the even go back to the NWO. The NW's goal was to take over WCW and to gain control of everything, every belt, control over the shows to the point where they did take over the show. They got their own pay-per-view. Both of those things were horrible, but still, at least they had for a while until they lost their way, like a narrative thrust where every week, are they going to get closer to this goal? Are we going to be able to finally stop them? There is no goal for Jon Moxley right now in a concrete term. It's this very vague, we're gonna make things the way it used to be. That's it. Like,
Whatever that may
and
be.
yeah, and I think that's a big thing. You want you want to create angles where fans can kind of see what's coming in the future and know, oh, this is going to be happening in the next couple months. That's going to be a big moment. Oh, this thing is going to come to a head. There's nothing like that here. It is literally just window dressing for a reason for Moxley to fight Orange Cassidy. And another thing that's weird about this angle, and again, I actually like I'm going to come away off of this show sounding way more about this angle than I really am, because there are aspects I like about I really like a lot of the performances in it. But like, okay, Moxley's about wanting to set AEW to the way it used to be. His feuds off the bat are Orange Cassidy and Darby Allin, two guys that no one has a problem with, you know, like AEW fans. And I get that maybe the storyline is supposed to be, well, he's disappointed because he wanted them to align with him, and so he's going after them. But still, it's like this feud's about, I'm gonna make AEW the way it was, and I'm feuding with guys who really haven't changed at all.
Yeah, like they're they're not necessarily like I like the idea behind when they attack Private Party, which is like, look, you guys, we thought you had potential 5 years ago, and we're still sitting here talking about how you guys are unrealized potential, and we're disappointed in you, and that's why we're going to kick
Like,
your ass. I like
it
that message.
it might stomp on toes, but you know what? Here's the feud, and I don't like fantasy booking, but here's the feud.
All right, listen up,
Moxley,
Tony. Listen up, Tony. Free idea coming your way
no,
from Trevor Dame.
he's not going to listen.
How dare
Moxley,
you say that? Tony Khan is a valued and consistent listener to this product.
but Moxley needs to call out MJF for last year and go, you fucked this, you and Adam Cole fucked over this company playing grab ass, and you know it might have been a ploy by Adam Cole, blah blah blah. And I want my revenge on you guys, you know. And you want to add some real charge to a feud, have it start to border on reality, do what wrestling does best, like incorporate reality. If Moxley really does feel like the company lost its way, let's push a feud that plays on what he felt. Let's push if you want to get those fans that you're talking about before, where you talk with Joe trying to figure out, you know, can we reach those fans, or have they given up? Well, what would speak to those fans if you really feel like the Adam Cole MJF feud is where those fans said goodbye. What would speak to them is a feud where a guy that kind of speaks for them calls those people out and says, I want revenge on you guys. I want to run you out of here. I want to make you suffer. Like you took my baby and you molested it. It, and maybe people wouldn't want that. Maybe I have no idea. People would be comfortable with that kind of feud if that would hurt feelings or whatever. But that is a feud that plays on reality. An Orange Cassidy Mox feud, we know Mox doesn't have real problems with Orange Cassidy. It's
Well,
not playing off of anything we've seen.
I think the Orange Cassidy is the first step in like a long-term story arc. I do think I don't know if they'll ever incorporate MJF, but I do think they're doing something with the elite in this Moxley group,
But
which is
have Moxley,
getting a
I mean,
little bit closer to what you're talking about, right?
have Moxley go up to Okada and go, "What happened to you? Why did the Bucks turn you to this guy that just says bitch?" Like play. If you want to have some edge, have him go. I'm going to try and turn these guys back to the way I think they should be, and if they don't accept it, we're going to have a problem. Then you have real stakes. You have real, I'm going to try and get Okada to align with me. Now you have a goal to build TV towards. Will he or won't he? Instead of just every week, Moxley's going to take over AEW, and then he comes in a truck and attacks some jobbers and says, I really expected more from you, Darby Allin.
So I think obviously like AEW has WWE getting hot has hurt AEW's ability to appeal to fans. I think a lot of fans that maybe were sampling the AEW product found themselves drifting back towards WWE. WWE obviously has a huge institutional advantage, just in terms of how long it's been around, childhood nostalgia, habit, all that kind of stuff. Favors WWE. And if fans are going to try to choose between how much time they have and how much money they have to commit to a certain wrestling product. And obviously WWE coming, I think, a lot better in those fans' eyes, has hurt AEW's ability to reach those fans. Consequently, if we see WWE cool off again, and history tells us that they are going to cool off again, and in fact, if you look at a lot of their data over the last few months, they have been cooling off again. And there are still, I think, a lot of reasons for pessimism in terms of WWE's popularity over the next 2 or 3 years. Does that present an opportunity where the worm turns again and AEW has a chance to win some of those fans that maybe were watching AEW because they didn't really like WWE, and then when Vince left, they kind of were like, I'll sample WWE, and kind of have shifted more back towards WWE leaning when they were previously AEW leaning? And how does AEW be able to capitalize on those fans? Because I think that's honestly like a fascinating discussion, because what do those fans want and how can AEW deliver that if WWE stops serving them the way they want them to? Because there'll be a point where WWE will go cold. They'll probably have they'll have a weak champion. There'll be something going on where fans are going to start tuning out of the product again. What can AEW do to capitalize on that? And how are those fans that are going to be coming back to the AEW product in 2026 different than the fans that were gravitating towards AEW in 2019? I think that's a really important topic, and in AEW should be prepared for that.
Well, first off, I don't even know if WWE is going to cool down because I know there's been little signs, but I felt that way before Punk came in and they pulled the rabbit out of their hat. And part of me's wondering, is John Cena's retirement year going to be like another
Yeah,
rabbit out
like
of the
that's why I
hat?
said the next 2 or 3 years, because I think like
Yeah.
you have John Cena, I don't know if The Rock's gonna be involved at WrestleMania. They'll obviously be hugely successful. I think what happened, like how successful they are, Raw on Netflix is a huge wild card. It could be hugely beneficial to them. It could be maybe not as beneficial to them as some think. It's really hard to say before we have tangible evidence of that. Um, like my pessimism towards WWE would be they're really milking this bloodline thing. I feel like it's definitely losing momentum in terms of people's interest as long as The Rock isn't involved. I don't think people care about this Solo Sikoa thing nearly as much as they did before. I think everything since Roman lost the title is kind of feels weak. I think Cody has lost some momentum because of that as well. And I would just look at like who on this WWE roster like feels like they could be the next big star that they're going to push forward. I'm still pretty down on their, younger wrestlers, the wrestlers with less exposure, television exposure, that kind of thing. I mean, I have never been further disconnected from the WWE fan base. So I could be completely wrong, but I definitely think there's reasons for pessimism over the next several years. I think obviously the John Cena retirement tour is going to be big, but at the same time, what was the last cool thing John Cena ever did in wrestling?
I mean, what I think is cool, and what WWE fans think is cool. I think
No,
are
but
ag-
but even amongst WWE fans, like the whole like he did that whole Austin Theory feud. He did the match with Solo Sikoa. Like no one gave a shit about that.
but he can easily do check boxes here where they can do.
If they're going to focus on him like wrestling a program with Roman Reigns and Cody,
Yeah.
then yeah, that's going to be big. But I don't know if they're going to do that because have been hesitant to do that. I don't know how much he's really going to be around. Like, is he really going to be around full time? Um, is he like how many matches is he actually going to work? I have some questions about that.
Well, going to your larger issue, first I would say, like, obviously, if WWE cools off a bit, that can only help AEW, but I don't know if it will help as much as some people think, because I don't think if WWE just cools down, that means those fans will go to AEW right now. I think they have to offer a positive, not just. I don't think it'll be like the start where just being an alternative period
Mhm.
will be enough for whatever reason.
Yeah,
I just get the
and
feeling that. Oh, go on.
And no, I was gonna say that's kind of the point I'm making, which is like the fans that are going to be coming to the AEW product, or the fans who are going to be burned out of the WWE product in a couple of years, hypothetically so, or they're getting there now, are going to be different than the fans that were burned out of the WWE product in like the 2010s.
And but the one way it would help is something you touched on when you're talking about it, which is one of the big things if the fans get less interested in WWE is they will have more time and resources to spend on other wrestling, because something I feel like sometimes people don't like mention enough is just, if you're a WWE fan right now, if you just watch NXT, SmackDown, Raw every week, you're getting 6 hours. It might be back up to 7 hours if they add the third hour to Raw back for Netflix. And then you have a PLE, a premium live event every month for WWE, and frequent takeovers too. That's like, most fans don't have more time to spend than that. And a lot of fans don't have the time to watch all of that either.
Mhm.
And so when you talk about, oh, we want to win over the WWE super fan, like, it's hard to get those fans to add you to their wrestling diet. Like, so I remember a couple people were surprised about, like, oh, you know, when WWE ran a pay-per-view or whatever, or a show against like Collision, the ratings went way down. People weren't shocked by that. But then they were like, oh, it's interesting when they run like an early day show like Crown Jewel or something on the same day as Collision, the ratings still go down for Collision. Well, it's like, yeah, if you're a WWE fan and you watch like a 3 or 4 hour show, do you want, even if it's not going head to head, do you want to sit down and then watch another 2 hours of wrestling later that day? There's gonna be a lot of people that go, I've had my fill of wrestling for today. I have other things I have to do in my life. And so yeah, if they get less popular, there will be more oxygen for other promotions to breathe. But I think one thing that would trouble me is, I feel like a lot of WWE fans have been raised into thinking that WWE is pro wrestling. And if you don't do it like WWE, it's not good. But then it's a catch 22, because if you do it like WWE, you're an imitation. You're less than. Even if you do it a good imitation. And you can look at wrestling history even before today, before WWE had 20 years of a near monopoly. Um, so many companies tried to imitate WWE or WWF and failed. TNA did, it didn't work. WCW did when they hired Russo in the late 90s and did a very Crash TV Raw-esque Nitro program for weeks. It didn't work. WCW tried to do it in 94 when they had Hulk Hogan and they tried to redo Hulkamania. It didn't really work. You know, and so the big thing to me would be, you're not going to win WWE fans over by trying to make it more like WWE. And if anything, I would say that's the wrong conversation. I would say the right conversation is not how to win over WWE fans. It's how do we win over fans that would be into wrestling but don't watch either brand, or people that have never don't watch wrestling regularly, and one of the reasons why is they've watched WWE and it just hasn't done anything for them. How do we win over those fans? And also for those WWE fans that might be lapsed, how do we make a product that's unique and different enough that a fan might go, hey, I like WWE, it's my favorite, but sometimes I'm in the mood for something a little bit different. And when I'm in the mood for something a little bit different, I watch AEW. I don't think going in that direction they tried to go in a year ago of being more of the same of the popular thing is what will work.
Yeah, I think when they went that direction a year ago, I don't know how much of that is like an overall philosophical experimentation within AW as much of it is, Max was the world champion. His preferred version of professional wrestling is in a more WWE like performance. And that's what ended up happening. I don't know if it was like we tried to be more like WWE and we failed. I think it was more like, look, we built the company heavily around a guy who does a lot of sports entertainment stuff.
No, I agree. That goes back to I don't think AEW has a real strong filter or specific vision as much as we give our top stars a lot of creative leeway, and one of our top stars in a key moment wanted to push things in a certain direction, and we let him, and that turned off some fans possibly. Although initially at the very start, before they went really hard into it, there was some dividends to that Cole MJF angle, but yeah, so it's not really like necessarily an edict from them, but again, that's part of being the filter of the company is when you see that stuff come up, go, sorry, that might be what you want to do, but we just can't. That doesn't fit the vision. We can't be too much like them. We have to be an alternative. We can't be something that's very similar to them because wrestling history has shown imitating the number when you're number two, imitating number one, it never pays off. Uh, And yeah, I just don't think that would work for them. And here's the thing I was thinking of the other day, which I think is going to be really tough for them, which is the longer this goes, the tougher it's going to be to find wrestlers and creative voices that don't think the way to do everything is WWE. There's going to be more and more WWE-esque ideas you're going to have to filter out because we are now at the age where there is a generation of wrestlers coming up where WWE was all they knew of wrestling. And there's going to be a lot of the creative minds in wrestling that are being released, or production people, all these people, they're only coming from WWE. There isn't like it isn't like the territory days. It isn't like the 90s even when you had WCW and WWE and ECW with three different visions of wrestling and you could cross-pollinate it with different people that had very different ideas. It's like so many of the wrestlers and production people and behind the scenes people, all that stuff are coming designed and raised on WWE, and it's going to be hard to find that next 25-year-old that doesn't see the wrestling world through that prism.
Yeah, I mean, I always say like I've been saying this more recently. It's like I am too young to remember WCW. I was 5 when they closed. All right, I have gray hair, so like that's how long ago we're talking in terms of an additional approach. Look, and like WWE's version of pro wrestling is so pervasive throughout the entire industry that's always going to have some influence on almost any product, especially United States American television product. Um, it really is just about filtering those those kind of aspects. I do think that we need to if AW um if my one general piece of advice for AW just as an outsider would be, I think you kind of touched on it before, like let's have a hard set of rules about what we want to have on our programming and what we don't want to have on our programming. Let's be consistent with that. And I think there has to be a stronger policing of what gets shown on our television. Just to send that message to fans. I
Yeah.
don't it doesn't have to be a super strong, like we're gonna do absolutely none of this. But there has to be some level of consistency. And I think
Yeah.
that would do a lot more to get me excited about the product than like a meta storyline where Jon Moxley's going to say he's going to restore the feeling or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, and again, you can have a lot of variety within parameters, but there needs to be like, here's a few things that we're always going to do that we believe in, and here's a few things we're never going to do. What are we for and what are we against? You need to have answers to those two questions. And yeah, it's just I don't like. I don't know if I could answer those questions for AEW right now. What does AEW do that, like, what are they for and what are they against? I don't know if I can
Mhm.
answer. They'll give really strong, specific
Yeah,
answers. Not
I
a
would
lot of
say,
them.
yeah, AEW's biggest advantage and most obvious advantage is the in-ring wrestling matters, and the in-ring wrestling is a lot better than WWE. Even as WWE has improved in a lot of regards, if anything, the in-ring wrestling seems to be of less importance. And the fans seem cool with it. I mean, but you watch any WWE show, is a lot. Even the matches themselves are almost like downtime. A lot of the big matches, you're just waiting for interference, you're waiting for someone to run down, you're waiting for this angle to unfold. The actual action in the ring is pretty boring. And AEW is way more aggressive and athletic and exciting from a bell to bell perspective. It's still a company that, if you like professional wrestling, it is the company to watch. WWE has these long-term stories and this fan investment in certain characters. They've been able to pull that off really nicely. But I still think, like, the big definitive edge AEW has is that their matches are way better. Their pay-per-views, top to bottom, have these incredible matches. You see a much wider variety of styles. Things aren't watered down. Matches aren't being put together by the same handful of agents that contain the same spots. All that kind of stuff. AEW. That's still AEW's main advantage, and I still think they do a good job focusing on that. Like you mentioned, that AEW would never, I mean, WWE would never just like have Hologram versus Beast Mortos like as just like a random kick-ass match. I think that's a huge advantage AEW
Yeah.
has and should continue to lean into.
What I would do if I was AEW, and I've talked about this before, I would run down everything from the in-ring to how we do interviews to how we do production to how we promote everything. And I would just have a series of meetings with everyone that was in charge of those departments and run down and go, we're going to go everything. And we're going to go for everything. We're going to bring up every major point. We're going to say, how does WWE do it? And after we look at how WWE does it, we're going to say, is there a way we can do it differently that's better than WWE does? And if there is, we're doing that. If there's there a way we can do it, that if the answer is no, then we ask ourselves, is there a way we can do it differently than WWE does it that's as good as WWE? So it's similar quality, but it's just different. If the answer is yes to that, even we say yes. If there's something we can do different than WWE that's maybe 5% worse than the way WWE does it, but it's different, you might even say yes to that. And to me, the point would just be everything we can do different that isn't actively hurting the company, we do different. Every aspect of the from the production to the in-ring to everything, we make something different. And obviously, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are some good things WWE does, things I've even mentioned, the way they focus on certain stars and things. There's things you can take from WWE, and there's things you should take from WWE. But in general, if there's something you can do differently and it's not going to subtract from the company's quality, you should be. And again, there isn't a real strict focus on W on an AEW where I feel like anyone's thinking of that. I feel like again, when I watch AEW, when I see a segment, I don't feel like, oh, that fits Tony Khan's overall vision of what wrestling should be. I think, oh, that's what some producer or one of the wrestlers involved wanted to do. And then the next segment can be completely different because of the same reason.
Yeah, I think so. You're in your full bore. Like, we can't do anything WWE does on our product, or if we do something like that, we want it to be better than WWE.
If we do something that WWE does, it has to be something really good.
Mm.
Like it has to be something where, to do it any other way would be ridiculous.
Yeah,
We'd
like
really.
I was gonna say, I'm not an absolutist in terms of like like some people are like, they see some, that's what WWE do, and it's like seen as poisonous. I don't necessarily feel that way, even though I have an enormous amount of dislike for WWE in my heart. Um, I think I just I'm sometimes hesitant to say that, because I think there are certain aspects of WWE that can be adopted that AEW can do better. A lot of that may be from institutional infrastructure than it is from the actual on-screen
Yeah, a
product.
lot of it that they could take a lot structurally, like the stuff we talked about, like focus on certain talent a little more often, be more consistent how you promote things, be better about how you promote yourself, things like that. But when I think the rules would work better, like that, those kind of conversations would be good at more filtering out stuff like is really the only way to get across that someone is in the feud with someone else is during the middle of a match, we cut to someone backstage looking at a video screen with the same expression on their face. Like, yes, that's the way WWE does it. Is there any other way we can do that? That's at least as good as that. I think there's ways you could do it that would be better. And I feel, again, it's one of those things where any one of those things seems insignificant. If you find 12 of those things, you start making a company that feels different.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, and again, like, are having this conversation 5 years into AEW, like, that we still need to talk about like this? Do you think that's like a sign of weakness with the company, that it's still trying to fight out of WWE shadow? It seems like it's more in WWE shadow than it was 5 years ago.
Well, it's fighting a different battle than it did 5 years ago. When AEW started, WWE was not hot. It was not critically acclaimed, and AEW got a lot of benefits from just being the national alternative that people had on a scale people hadn't seen since WCW. And now, so in a way, they haven't been fighting the same war for 5 years, because the war they've been fighting in the last 2 or 3 years is new, which is how do you live with a company how do you live being a company that now has a track record itself long enough where people might look back and go, this wasn't as good as what you did last month. This isn't as good as what you did last year. And also, how do you fight against a company that is now hot and kind of is now dictating things again? That's it. And so, I feel like when you watch AEW now, they're a company that's still trying to adjust, that they have a different challenge now.
Yeah. Real quick, this WWE ID program. I know I haven't really talked about it at all. It seems like, WWE is trying to snap up some talent, or at least have some sort of agreement with certain talents that maybe make it more difficult for AEW to sign younger talent, especially from the indies. If WWE kind of has first dibs on them, which is what seems like these ID agreements are. Um, that is kind of a different aspect than anything we've really talked about, but it does set up kind of a different competitive. I think AEW had a competitive advantage in terms of signing talent directly from the indies than WWE in a lot of cases. WWE seems to be trying to maybe shorten that, give themselves a leg up by, giving some of this talent a small amount of money, and giving them, first dibs on signing them if they want to bring them into a larger full-time contract. Um, I think it's probably years away before we see this really manifest itself in any important way. But it is kind of a new level of battle between these two companies.
Yeah, I think the WWEID thing is not good for wrestling as a whole, but I think it's ingenious from WWE's end, because think about what it's doing. So right now, if a talent internationally or on the indies gets hot, it's kind of a jump ball, because yeah, you might have certain scouts that see or hear from somebody that someone's has potential before the other company does, but generally the wrestling world, we all kind of see things around the same time when someone starts making a name on the indies or anywhere. Like, we all kind of, some people might have heard about Nick Wayne a few months before other people did, but generally there was like a season of time where we all kind of went from not really knowing Nick Wayne to knowing, oh, this guy is a young guy with a lot of potential, and that's generally how it works.
People,
And
yeah, there were
so,
people that listened to Wrestle Observer Live and people who didn't.
yeah, you knew early on with Brian Alvarez that this little preteen was going to be no, but it so the thing I was going to say is, so when everyone kind of realizes like, oh, this guy is getting hot at once, it kind of becomes a jump ball where, yes, WWE has some advantages, where there are a lot of wrestlers, especially of the modern generation, that they grew up on WWE, so their dream is to be in WWE. They want to be on a WrestleMania, all that stuff, and so that's an allure that and a thing WWE can offer that AEW simply can't. But there are things AEW can offer too. Like, they could maybe say, hey, we'll put you on TV quicker. We'll put you in a bigger program quicker. We'll be offering you more money than TKO is willing to offer a person of your stature. And so you see stuff like that happen. And sometimes WWE wins a battle for one of these hot talents, and sometimes AEW does. But you kind of see this pattern repeat over and over, where someone comes on the radar, and then there's a race to sign them, and it's kind of even in the sense that the companies kind of learn about this talent at the same time, and then it's just who can offer the best deal. So like Stephanie Vaquer or something, all of a sudden AW books her on paper, they start to really take notice of her, and all of a sudden within probably hours she has offers from WWE and AEW. So what WWEID does when you think about it is it it stops the jump ball. It gets their hooks and talent before they even show the potential. Because what WWEID is going to do is going to tell talent basically, hey, if you want to become a wrestler, if you want a leg up, go to one of these 4 or 5 approved WWE schools, where it's the Black and the Brave or the Nightmare Factory.
Okay, can I just say for a second, like they started with that, but now they're signing people from like literally all over the place.
I think when you talk about things that are going to manifest in a few years, this is what I'm talking about. Yeah, but I think right now, because obviously it's going to take years for that part of it to pay off. But yeah, right now they're just going to supplement with guys. But I think ideally, one thing that's really going to pay off for them that people aren't thinking as much about is the idea that we're going to get young guys and we're going to steer them towards these 4 or 5 schools because they're going to go, hey, these are WWE approved, and they're going to be able to sell these guys and go, look, you can go do a lot of wrestling schools, but these are ones run by wrestlers you know and love, and also we have eyes watching them, which means if you start to get good at all, we're going to be seeing you. We're going to offer you almost immediately a deal that's going to lock you in, and so it's going to be this thing where there is going to be no jump ball. If a wrestler, if Nick Wayne, if the Nick Wayne of 5 years from now, start goes to wrestling school and a year in starts showing potential. Well, if that wrestling school was the Nightmare Factory, Cody Rhodes and his trainers are going to see that before anyone else does, and they're going to lock him in before anyone else, even the fans or AEW, sees that he has that potential, and he's going to have some piddly WWE ID deal that will give him some level of being locked in. And then the second on the indies, while he's in his WWE ID deal working the indies, he starts to really show, oh, he's really got something. They'll just transfer that ID deal to an NXT deal, and there will be no opportunity for anyone else to snatch him up. So basically, you're this idea of having we have a race to sign talent whenever a talent reveals themselves to be emerging, whenever someone reveals to be good. We're just gonna we're just going to cut at that, go earlier in the loop. We're going to start getting our hooks and talent before they even show that potential. And it almost reminds me, there's a skit on Mr. Show where they were making fun of that documentary Hoop Dreams about basketball players. And it's these 2 basketball agents trying to compete with each other, and they're trying to recruit players earlier and earlier to try and beat the other player to the punch. So all of a sudden, the skit boil eventually reduces down to like one's like trying to recruit a baby, and then one's trying to recruit like a fetus in the womb. And that's basically what WWE is doing right now. They're being like, you know, we're going to start recruiting, we're getting obligations from guys before we even know if they're going to be good wrestlers or not. And they have the resources to do it. They can spend a little bit of money. I don't know how much these ID deals offer or what, but it'll be a drop in the bucket, and in return, they're buying bets on these talents.
Yeah, I do. I think just in general, we're probably we need a few years to kind of figure this out. Just in general, not just with these idea deals, but like what kind of talent are the indies gonna produce? I feel like it's been a while since the US indies at least have produced like a lot of like talent that AEW would be like immediately interested in. Um I just think the arms race between AEW and WWE, the amount of people that were signed, how early those people were being signed into their moments of indie prominence. There just isn't a lot of names out there on the indies that feel like they are going to even have the potential to be difference makers for either company. Um, and I don't know how valuable it is to sign these guys so early when I don't really know what kind of talent the current indie landscape is capable of producing. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Um,
and I think it could be bad for developing talent too, because I think this like one thing I really worry about in wrestling is the homogenization of wrestling, where something I just mentioned before about how so much of the talent now was raised on WWE and so much of the and so it's hard to get outside ideas. And when you think about like so you go back to the 90s where if you wanted to be different or have a fresh idea, it was easy to find ideas from around the world that someone hadn't used yet. Like when WWE when they were the WWF in the late 90s is like, shit, WCW's eating our lunch. What do we do? There's this ECW that some fans had heard of, but wasn't as big as the big two that you could like borrow or steal an idea from, and it would be this fresh idea of like going more risque and more
Well,
violent
like
and
the
stuff.
everyone no, like the NWO is literally just copied from New Japan's.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's a great it too. When WCW is like, how do we differentiate ourselves in the mid '90s from the WWF? Well, we can lift an idea from New Japan that no American fans going to know about, and we can bring in talent from like AAA and from Lucha and from Japan, like the Japanese juniors, and they're going to be mind blowing to the average American fan because no one here in the days before the internet's really got off the ground in a big way is going to very few other than the most hardcore tape training fans is ever going to see these guys before. They're going to do things you literally didn't think were possible. And if you look at wrestling today, everything is so homogenized where wrestlers the footage is so much more available, and so wrestlers around the world wrestle a lot closer to each other than ever before, and ideas are more widely known. And the thing that would terrify me about the WWEID is we don't know yet how much they're going to like influence, like when they sign these guys to ID deals, how much are they going to tell them you should do this in the ring, you should not do this, you should only work with these approved indies or these approved trainers going
Yeah, I
forward, blah
mean,
blah blah.
we saw this with the UK deals when they first signed those talents to those UK contracts. It was like, okay, you can keep working wherever you want, but we get first dibs on dates. And it was like, well, maybe you guys can only work with these few promotions. Oh, you know what? You can only work with other if you're gonna lose, you can only lose to other WWE signed talent. Like it became a lot more controlling about what these individuals can do, as opposed to the freedom to learn and explore themselves as independent workers.
Exactly. And one of the reasons why the indies worked when the indies were healthy, like, in the early 2000s and the 2010s before today, which I agree with you, they're not healthy today. But one of the reasons why the indies were such a better development source of talent for WWE than their own thing was because it was breeding fresh ideas and people that worked differently and did things different than WWE's system. And that's one of the things you really want from the when you raid from outside companies is you want fresh ideas and fresh perspectives and fresh talents. And one of the reasons why the developmental system has fallen short is because it's teaching guys right from the start to do things the way there's no fresh ideas. You're teaching them to do everything exactly the way it's currently being done by you guys. And so if you start tinkering with talent on the indies as they're developing, you're gonna like choke away the dying place that was giving you any ideas to begin with. I realize again, the indies today, yes, are very sickly, but if you choke the life out of them and get in the creative loop while these guys are just starting to learn wrestling, they're never gonna go back to the way they were. You're not gonna get the next Kevin Owens or Sami Zayn because you're gonna train them how you're training the next
Yeah.
insert NXT guy here.
Well, when you're talking about like homogenization, I think that gets back to like AEW has a huge role to play in terms of being that alternative wrestling style that people grow up now watching and seeing. If you are 18 years old, then AEW started when you were 13, which gives you a real chance to when you start getting into wrestling, you're not necessarily only going to be watching and consuming WWE because that's all there's been. And that is ultimately a huge role that AEW is going to play in the future. Is that it's going to be the place that's not WWE for people to understand pro wrestling.
Yeah, it was blowing my mind. I forget who there was some wrestler in TNA in the last few years who like was talking about how they when they won a TNA title, they had like TNA nostalgia because they grew up watching, and it blew my mind. But it's like that is something that AEW, just by the nature of the longer they exist, they will start to grow in that sense where I think WWE will still have the edge, being the bigger company, but there will be fans, wrestlers that are like, no, I have a soft spot for AEW too. And where right now I mean it's starting to change a little bit, but right now WWE still has a huge card to play that AEW doesn't have, which is just I grew up watching this since I was 5. And like you said, well, now some fans might say I grew up watching since I was 13, but that childhood pull of this is all I've ever thought wrestling was. WWE only has had that for one generation. They didn't have that before like 2001, and they won't have it going forward now, but they're going to reap the rewards of that for one generation.
I'm gonna wrap things up, dude. Trevor, do you have anything you want to plug?
My podcast Through the Years, THROH for Through. We cover the early days of Ring of Honor. We've reviewed almost every show now. We cover them in order of the first 5 years. We just put out a 6-hour Bryan Danielson career retrospective with lots of inter clips from past guests. It was just a big Titanic thing. We got lots of positive feedback on. And yeah, that's basically it. Trevor Dame on Twitter, and if you search for me on Blue Sky, don't know what my Blue Sky handle is, but you'll find me there too. And yeah, that's that.
All right. I want to thank Trevor for joining the show. I want to thank for all our listeners, and I'll talk to you again after a while. Bye bye.